Hello and welcome to Spy Hard's podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur. And Scott, show me your chickens. Show me your chickens.
Did it again. You dastardly human being. You did it again. You took my outro line.
I had another one underlined, so maybe that'll be the outro line. We'll find out.
I can't wait.
But I took the good one.
Well, Cam, we have a film so vast and grand in scale, so sweeping in its romance, that I think it was just too much for us to handle. So I brought in an extra pair of hands. Joining us and sneaking his way across the podcast border, it is none other than Mr. Tom Pickup from the Really 007 podcast. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hello, guys. And you're absolutely right. It's not only taken maybe 2 years for this to happen, but also yesterday, the day of meant to be recording, I got something in my eye. I don't know what it was, so we had to rearrange it yet again. So I apologise for that, but I can now see, which is great.
Was it a golden eye?
I wish. No.
I was going with Al-I.
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Very good.
But I think before we dive into the film so much, I kind of want to talk to you a little about you and your love of spy movies and really 007. Let's talk about it all. Let's go back a wee bit because, you know, me and you brought up this film in a conversation, and we'll get to maybe why this was picked. But, you know, your love for spy films must go back a bit. So take us back to your sort of first experiences of spy movies.
Yeah, I think it will have to be James Bond mainly.
Sure.
And then that sort of goes on to the wider love of spy films. But I wouldn't say I'm not a massive connoisseur of like early 50s, 60s spy films. I have seen most of them, maybe once or twice though.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more thrillers and anything with guns. When we were kids, that's what we wanted to do, sort of go out and play and pretend that you were James Bond, pretend that you were Indiana Jones or whoever. And yeah, I think that's just carried off. When we were younger, we had a friend, Daniel, up the road who had a really big garden, and we had a camcorder and we filmed James Bond films of our own.
Oh, yeah.
So that's sort of like mixing the broadcasting type thing with the love of James Bond. And yeah, I think we started our podcast at a similar time to you. It was in lockdown, 2020, I think.
I think we were within a couple of weeks of each other. It was
amazing.
We're all stuck inside together, and we thought, hey, let's just talk about things that we love, and we ended up here.
It helped, didn't it? And it's still going, so we can't have done too badly.
I mean, I really can't stand Cam.
That's true. That's true.
It's tough.
We're bitter enemies.
Are you looking for extra hosts on Really 007? I'll jump ship at any point.
Well, we've got the 6 of us, so
Yeah.
that's a logistic nightmare trying to get all of us at the same time recording. So often we have to have like 3 or 4 of us, but it generally works out. Apart from the reviews where we do have all 6, and that's why it took about a year, I think, to record the last one, the Dine of the Day one. Probably take everyone a year to listen to it as well because it was about 18 hours.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack with that one, but I was going to ask. You mentioned, shooting your own James Bond movies as a kid. I just want to know, who did you play in these movies?
To be honest, I never got to play the main man. It was Matt, my brother, who was Bond, and Daniel. In fact, everyone else apart from me. But I like to direct it and sometimes write it and film it. But yeah, as we evolved, we all had a go in the script and everything. At first, when we were that young, we just sort of said, press record. Bond can do this now. Bond does that. The editing was stop, start, stop, start. We didn't have an editing kit or anything like that. Because this is back in late 90s now. You're talking. All because GoldenEye, gave us that Bond on screen at the cinema, which we hadn't seen before. So that sort of reignited our love for Bond. And yeah, because when you're growing up, it was just on video. It was like a thing of the past.
Mm-hmm.
But to have James Bond in our lives, in the screens, on TV, Pierce Brosnan waving the flag was terrific. And yeah, wish it was back.
Well,
yeah.
That's another conversation.
It's funny. You were at home making spy movies with your friends and family, and I I was shooting situational comedy stuff around West London, like doing,
Oh,
like Trigger Happy TV. Do you remember that?
oh yeah, I loved it. Absolutely
That
loved
was
it.
my jam. I was all over West London with a giant mobile phone, screaming in the streets. And there's a lot of home videos of that out there. I don't think I'll ever release it because it's embarrassing as hell.
Well, it gives you a sort of education into film, the
It
film world,
does. Yeah.
and the television. Yeah, that's great though. Anything creative, I think it helps, and that's how we've sort of united as podcasters and Bond fans, spy fans around the world. Really,
Well, that actually segues me on beautifully to the question I was going to ask, which is, you mentioned, your show started up around the same time as ours. Really, 007. You are the 007 podcast. I think now you are the ones out there flying the flag for Bond worldwide. Tell us a little bit about the show and sort of the genesis.
that's very kind of you, Scott. But yes, all it was really was Rob, who's one of our six, as I mentioned before. He was starting doing a podcast called For Your Reconsideration,
Hmm.
sort of underrated, mainly 90s action films that either got a critical mauling or didn't do very well at the box office. And him and a couple of our mates from Sheffield Uni, they started a podcast about that, which was so much fun listening to. I just thought, well, why don't we do one about Bond? I know there's loads of Bond ones out there, but to be honest, I never really listened to many of them. I never really a podcast listener. I didn't know there was a world of it
Mm.
until this. And now, of course, I listen to loads of them. I can't get enough of them. But I didn't know there was that Bond world out there. So I sort of naively said, why don't a few of us do a trial recording? We'll talk about Octopussy, because I thought that's a funny one to start with, because it's got a bit of everything, hasn't it? It's quite silly, it's quite serious in places. And yeah, we've always taken a fondness to that. And then so there's me and my two of my three brothers. There's four of us. We started it off with Rob and John, one of our friends from football, actually. And then Chris joined us fairly early on. He is now Math's brother-in-law, I think. So yeah, but we didn't. None of us knew Chris that well, but he's been amazing. So we've got to know each other through the podcast even more. And yeah, it just started out as a bit of fun. It wasn't meant to be anything serious. We thought we'd review each film and then call it a day. But because it took so long, we started doing other episodes, like, about, say, we did one about the henchmen.
Hmm.
We've done one about the Bond girls, just sort of different themes of the series. And James Bond Radio ended, and I suppose that was our inspiration. We used to listen to them. They were brilliant. And they sort of helped us along the way with like contacts and things. And yeah, I don't know. When you start, you don't know anyone, but I suppose you build a reputation, and then if we managed to get one guest, we couldn't believe that, and then they tell somebody else, and then they tell somebody else, and when you've had a few guests lined up, you can say, well, you can have a look at our other interviews. I'm sure you're the same, So there's that sort of roster that's adding up, and make sure that those people know that it is a genuine, safe place to come and chat Bond. And
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. We just don't take it very seriously, to be honest. It's just when you love something like that, Bond, you don't sort of have to talk about it in a way that, oh yes, what happened next in the plot. It's more like, this bit was funny, wasn't it? And how weird is this? Why do we remember these scenes so long ago? From, like, you could say Diamonds Are Forever. There's a scene at the circus with a fake gorilla, the balloon thing. What is going on? And it's that kind of thing that we're drawn together on, the sort of weirdness of it all, I think. But yeah, we just love doing it, and long may it continue. Same for you guys.
Are you talking about that bizarre show they go to in Diamonds Are Forever?
Yeah,
Actual real thing back in the day.
you're joking. Oh, well, you're Vegas bound, aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. They actually used to stage that show in Las Vegas, and for whatever reason, I guess the Broccoli's were like, we need to showcase that in the movie.
This is what this needs: gorillas and clown faces. Let's do it.
Yeah. The gorilla bit is a bit dodgy, isn't it? I mean, we didn't
is.
realise that as kids at the time, but yeah, it's not good, really.
You could still play the shooting clown game. Me and Cam played it a couple of years ago.
Oh well, there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfect.
Yeah.
You get a amazing stuffed toy at the end.
We got little moons, I believe. It wasn't
Yeah.
quite as nice as Jill St. John got.
Like, crescent moons. We could kind of hold them like, James Bond guns, though. So we got a photo.
That's all right. Yeah, that'll do.
Yeah.
I like to think that they were saying that me and Cam are in our twilight.
Oh,
Long in the tooth. Long in the tooth.
because we look like vampires.
But yeah, you talk about sort of how the show has evolved, really 007 has evolved. And I'm really proud of us and yourselves because, we've sort of expanded, both of us, into this, doing interviews and things like that to sort of go along with our film reviews and things like that. And I think other shows have done interviews in the past. We're not groundbreaking here, but in the sense of, I think between the two of us, we're really casting a wide net on giving voices to people in the Bond community that haven't had them in previously or haven't had the ability to speak to such a wide audience. It's great to see us both sort of doing that out there and getting different guests and sort of complimenting each other, I think.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest names that get the sort of most attention, because you've already got a captive audience of Bond fans.
Mm-hmm.
I like speaking to the guys who've like written books about Bond.
Yeah.
We're speaking to one guy recently, Mark Hernandez, who wrote a book about the Neen Valley Railway and how they filmed those scenes for GoldenEye and more promptly Octopussy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a compendium of about 200 people's stories from that area who worked on the film just by pure fate, really, the fact that it was filmed there. And then, of course, he'd spoken to John Glenn and everything, some of the actors. But just to talk about the passion of Bond fans, I think is great. And it's something that we've all got in common when we've met up on these social things, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Cam, there's not as many other in America, it doesn't seem. But
No, I'm in Canada. There's even less.
Oh, you're in Canada, sorry. Right, okay, well, yeah. Well, there's Shayla, isn't there? Shayla's a great Bond voice over there.
She's on the East Coast, Cam's on the West Coast. They're the only two Canadian Bond fans that are online, apparently. So,
yeah, probably looking at like a, 9 or 10 hour flight to meet up with Shayla.
Right, well, sorry about that. She's probably near us then, isn't she?
Yeah, it's a indirect. I think I'd have to have multiple transfers for that one.
Right, okay. But anyway, good getting to know everyone, around the Bond world.
That's right.
Well, it's been great. It's been great building those bridges and having those conversations that we wouldn't have had before. All of us, the six of you, the two of us, start talking into microphones with no credentials whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. But pivoting away from James Bond, we've got a film to talk about. And Cam, I'm going to throw it to you to cue us up.
Yes, we are going to discuss the 2016 Robert Zemeckis film Allied, starring Brad Pitt and Marion Cotillard.
And I think what I'll do is I'll read everyone out the synopsis, and then I want to dig into maybe why we picked this film a little bit. So for those of you who haven't seen the film, here is the synopsis. Allied. The enemy is listening. In 1942, an intelligence officer in North Africa encounters a female French resistance fighter on a deadly mission behind enemy lines. When they reunite in London, their relationship is tested by the pressures of war. I ended that very pleasantly. That wasn't really...
Yeah, I was like, wow, war with a bow on it.
War! Hey, who doesn't like war? Yeah, that's about right. It really leans heavily on the beginning of the film and not the actual drama.
Spoilers, though, wouldn't there? You don't want to say too much at this stage.
That's true. You don't want to give the twist away.
No.
And sort of one thing I hinted to earlier, Tom, was something. This film is something that we've discussed about a film to have you on to talk about, because one thing this show gives us the opportunity to do is not just talk about one particular thing, it's go around the whole spy genre and talk about all different types of spy films. And that kind of why I wanted to include you in this, because I think it'll give you a chance to talk about a different kind of spy film as well. So this film came up, and maybe but without sort of sharing your thoughts on the film, what is it about this one that made it jump out to you?
Yeah, well, I saw this. This is weird. I'm a barrister in near Manchester, but I had a hearing near Birmingham, somewhere called Walsall, and I had a hearing at 10, and I had one at 3:30, and my 10 o'clock finished dead early, and I'm in Walsall, and I don't know what to do with my hours, and I just thought, is there anything on at the cinema? I went down to watch Allied because it happened to be on, and there was, I don't know, there's barely any promotion for it. I think there's one other person. I mean, it was in the afternoon, to be fair. There's one other person there watching it with me. And I had no expectations going into it other than, the caliber of the filmmakers and the actors involved. And, the reviews have been a bit sniffy. So I was thinking, I don't know. I might be worried that this isn't going to be any good, but it's just, this is nice. I should be at court now and I'm watching a film. So that's how I was introduced to it. And yeah, I've sort of preached the word a little bit about this film because I did really like it, and I subsequently seen it maybe two or three times.
Wow. Okay.
And I think because it's a Robert Zemeckis film, because his previous few films had all been computer generated, maybe more family orientated. This was a sort of return to adult filmmaking and not really anything he's done before that I could think of, this sort of genre. So I was really interested in that aspect to it. But I won't give away my full thoughts on the film yet though.
Well, it's interesting you managed to fit it in your work day, though. I hope the cases went great either side.
Yeah, I can't remember to be honest. I was
Good day. The middle was good at least, anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I know I haven't got a connection with this film. I hadn't seen it in theaters. This is the first time watch for me, so I was excited to sort of experience it with this. I know a lot of the credentials of the film, as you mentioned, Tom, high caliber people behind it. Cam, what about you though? I imagine you probably did see it.
I did see it in theaters. I had to rack my brain because like the circumstances in which I saw Allied were kind of vague to me. Like a lot of movies I really remember the time and place. Not so much this one. I think it's because it was released in kind of like that kind of fall Oscar-y kind of season, and it was a non-player. Like that movie opened and no one was really talking about it. And so to the best of my memory, I went like Tom on my own. I don't think I went with another person. I don't think anyone wanted to see it with me. And it was probably like a cheap Tuesday or something like that. And I went and I saw it and I walked out like I think reasonably enjoying it. But it did not linger in my mind. And I had to actually like sit there when I sat down last night and really like, okay, what do I remember about Allied? And I really only remembered them sitting on rooftops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Firstly, I love the inference that you often go to the cinema with other people, Cam. I mean, do we need to be lying here about Allied?
That's rough, Scott.
Hey, that's what the thing does in the film. It fades away and shows lie.
It's true. It's true.
It's there. Okay, well, Cam's telling fibs already. It's nice to know. So you do have a connection to it, though. So you at least remember the rooftops.
I remembered the rooftops.
That's all we've got, the rooftops. We'll all be smoking a cigarette on the roof by the end of this, I'm sure. Well, let's talk about it then, because you mentioned how there wasn't a lot of buzz, and Tom mentioned there's only two people in the theater. It sounds like there wasn't a lot of love for it. It's interesting. I think I posted about it today on social media, and it was mixed response.
I've seen that now. Mixed is fair, I think. I think it was slightly worse than that, maybe.
Yeah, well, I didn't expect that because I'll get into it, but I've had a generally positive experience with Allied, which I want to talk about, and we'll get there. But I want to hear from Cam, the man. Why did no one care about this film?
Well, I mean, we'll have a little bit of a road there, but it starts with writer Stephen Knight, who's a British screenwriter and pretty acclaimed. And got to start, and I need the Brits in the room to explain this to the North Americans and elsewhere. So he got to start in the 90s, writing for comedians like Jasper Carrott and Frankie Howard. Can you please explain who these people are?
Oh,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, Jasper Carrott was a very well-known comedian when I was a young, and he had what's that sort of show he had on BBC?
Carrot's Commercial Break, I think.
That sounds right to me. But he was kind of like, it did like a talking head stuff, and it would cut the segments and things like that. And I always remember my parents watching Jasper Carrott and me kind of being like, oh, I'm going to laugh at it too because I'm an intelligent small person, and just sort of enjoying it for that. But I think he's still going. He's still doing comedy and things like that. So yeah, all the power to him. But that's Jasper Carrott for you.
Okay, what about Frankie Howard?
You know Frankie Howard, don't you? From the Carry On. He's in some of the Carry On films. I say, you know,
amazing impression there. Bang on. I can tell you that Cam has never seen a Carry On.
True.
Well,
true.
Yeah, I think it's one where you were either sort of brought up in England. They were on telly, weren't they, all the time on the afternoon. Mm-hmm. But I haven't really seen many since I was a child, and I don't know whether they are for children. But
Carry On Spying still gets played quite a bit because that's actually quite a safe one of the Carry Ons compared to some of the later ones that are a bit.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I've not seen those ones.
I was at a store once and I saw a DVD set of Carry On films, and I immediately thought of Scott. And I'm like, oh, I should watch these. $30? No.
No.
Kept walking. So Stephen Knight was writing specials for those two comedians, and then he became one of the lead writers on Jasper Carrott's TV show The Detectives.
Yes.
Is that
right?
Okay,
that
that rings a bell. Cool.
Really good. It's really good. Yeah, I did watch that, and it was with Robert Powell, who played Jesus of Nazareth in the Franco Zeffirelli TV movie. Well, TV serial.
He was
Yeah,
also Hannah in the 70s version of the 39 Steps.
Boom.
brilliant. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
That's straight from the noggin there. That's coming out. That's some spy knowledge for you all.
So after working in comedy, Stephen Knight in 2001 writes his first motion picture, which was a British romance called Gypsy Woman, starring Jack Davenport. And that movie didn't really cross over here, so I think it's kind of lost to the sands of time. And there's a lot of sand in the movie we'll talk about today as well.
Yeah.
But he followed that up with 3 very acclaimed films. The 2003 Stephen Frears thriller Dirty Pretty Things, which he got an Oscar nomination for his screenplay. He also wrote the 2006 Michael Apted slave trade abolishment drama Amazing Grace, and then the 2007 film Eastern Promises, directed by David Cronenberg, which was his big breakthrough, especially in North America. That movie had a huge impact. And then he started writing and directing his own material. So he made the Jason Statham film Redemption, which I never saw, in 2013. But that same year, he put out Locke with Tom Hardy, which was fantastic, about a guy going through kind of like several personal dramas all in his car, and it just plays out over like 90 minutes. And that movie was fantastic. Allied was actually his follow-up to writing the movie Burnt for Bradley Cooper in 2015.
Yeah.
Somewhat forgotten, but did get a bit of attention. And since then, he's been like kind of bumpy. He wrote and directed the 2019 movie Serenity with Anne Hathaway that was like an absolute disaster. Like on unconceivable levels.
I have no Serenity connection, but Tom and you just seem to have just bonded in that moment there. So just give us a little bit of Serenity, please. What happened?
I don't know if I can without spoiling it.
Yeah, the big spoiler is the most ridiculous twist anyone has ever created. But until then, it's pretty trashy, isn't it? And
yeah, it's kind of like a film noir kind of thing that just at a certain point just goes completely into Toontown.
Yeah.
Okay, much like the average episode of Spy Hards. Great, let's keep going.
And since then, Stephen Knight has also written Spencer, the Diana film with Kristen Stewart.
Oh, yeah.
And created the TV shows Peaky Blinders and Taboo. He's also actually currently attached to be one of the writers on Star Wars New Order, which will see the return of Rey.
Oh, Herfield, the new one. Oh, I see. Well, I mean, Peaky Blinders is huge here. I mean, they're still working. I think there's a film in the works now, or another season, one of the two.
And he is writing it, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's huge in the UK, at least. I don't know about North America.
It definitely has crossover here, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So where Allied came from is interesting. It's actually possibly based on a true story.
What?
So Stephen Knight was visiting a girlfriend's family in Texas when he was in his early 20s. And he had a conversation with the girl's aunt, and she told him this story that had happened to her brother. Her brother was working behind enemy lines, had a relationship with a French woman, and that resulted in a pregnancy. They moved to the U.S., and then it was revealed she was a German spy, and there was an execution.
Don't worry, spoilers are abound. Well, don't worry, Tom.
Don't worry.
Are spoiler full.
Gates are open.
We expect people to have watched, or at least watched the trailer.
Unless it's Serenity.
Well, that's your homework, folks, is to go and watch Serenity and come back to us and tell us how bad that twist was.
Yeah. So Stephen Knight, when he heard this, knew he had to tell the story. And it percolated for like 30 years before he finally turned it into a screenplay. But even he has kind of acknowledged the veracity of this story is up for debate. There's never been any sort of factual evidence that it's true, but he's always said, like, I was in my 20s. She had nothing to gain. I was not a writer. Like, there was nothing about telling this to me that was going to be conveyed. It was like, it came from a very personal place, he felt.
Well, it's some of the antics of the Secret Services during the war were quite crazy, and this is stuff from like declassified documentation. So it wouldn't surprise me if stuff like this did happen. Maybe not exactly this story, but something very similar.
Totally, yeah. And so he was heavily inspired, of course, by 1942's Casablanca. The movie is obviously set in 1942 as well. And originally, the story that this aunt had told him was in France. He moved it to Morocco for kind of those reasons, to tie it more to like a Casablanca-like vibe.
Which would also make sense because you've got lots of different languages blending
Mm.
there. That's kind of the sort of homes of spies during World War II as well, which kind of works better. Whereas France was an interesting place during World War II. Not so much going on with well, there was a lot of spy work, but I won't get into that. Go ahead, Cam.
Scott's critiquing the spy work of France.
The spy service in France. Come on, guys. What were you doing? No, they did some good work. But I'm not the expert.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm pretending I am. Go on, Cam. Please cut me off. I'm talking nonsense.
So Stephen Knight pitched this story to Brad Pitt, who loved it and jumped on board. And then it also won over Robert Zemeckis, who, I think we all know who Robert Zemeckis is. Chicago-born director who's kind of like follows in the trail of Steven Spielberg. And he and his writing partner, Bob Gale, impressed Spielberg actually so much with their early short work that Spielberg exec produced their first 2 motion pictures. The 1978 Beatles tribute, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and the 1980 comedy Used Cars starring Kurt Russell. Have you seen either of those movies? Either one of you?
Sadly not. No.
I Want to Hold Your Hand, I think I might have, because I did a deep dive on Beatles stuff when I was a bit younger. So I think I may have watched it, but it doesn't, I can't bring an image to the forefront of my memory.
Okay. I've seen Used Cars, and it's actually like a really fun, like madcap comedy. It's a little bit of that almost like Smokey the Bandit kind of vibe of like anything can go. Yeah, it's a fun movie. But both of those movies were like total box office bombs. And so Robert Zemeckis then just went off, split apart from Bob Gale, and made 1984's Romancing the Stone, which was a absolute smash, put his name on the map.
The classic.
And then he re-teams with Gale and Spielberg and does the Back to the Future trilogy. They also, Spielberg and Zemeckis also make Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And then Zemeckis just goes on and does Death Becomes Her, Forrest Gump, Contact, What Lies Beneath, Castaway, and then absolutely disappears into motion capture madness, which was the movies that Tom was talking about earlier, where there was the period where we got The Polar Express and Beowulf and Christmas Carol.
Christmas Carol, I'll defend.
I don't know. It's very video gamey.
I'll come to bat. It's better than the other two. Like, it's the best of those, like that triple bill.
I disagree. I'll take Beowulf.
You'll take because of what? Because it's like serious.
Oh, great.
I think it makes more interesting choices. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, it's kind of these are not movies I would sit and rewatch on a normal day. But
next week on Spy Hards, Beowulf.
Yeah. I would watch Beowulf over the other 2.
It's interesting though, like the Zemeckis thing of all this, because in my head before I did research for this, I actually had it as a Spielberg film in my head, because I just think those two are so connected in my mind. And I thought maybe he would appear as a producer in the credits, and he's not there either. He's nothing to do with it.
Well, Zemeckis has that Spielberg touch of being able to merge like very human stories with state-of-the-art filmmaking. And he is like a total tech nerd. You go through like any interview with Robert Zemeckis, he's just so excited about various technical things they could do. And that was the whole motion capture period, was him being like, I could put the camera anywhere and do anything with this technology. It just never caught on, and it kind of stalled his career. So he, in 2012, does the Denzel Washington film Flight, which was a bit of a comeback, really good movie. And then he did the 2015 film The Walk, which was kind of an adaptation of Man on Wire with Joseph Gordon-Levitt. That was more of an experiment in 3D, and it was very well done, but it didn't really connect. And then he makes Allied. But like since then, the guy just seems kind of lost. He did like the Pinocchio remake. He did the Witches remake. I don't know. He's currently attached to direct a movie with that'll reunite Robin Wright and Tom Hanks called Here. That is, I believe, all set in a room, and it will feature them at various ages.
And he could put the camera anywhere.
That's right. And so it's very, like, technically ambitious, but we'll have to see. I don't know, like, where do you guys sit with Robert Zemeckis?
For me, he feels like the ultimate nostalgia. I mean, maybe not as level of Spielberg or Lucas or anything like that, or, for me, Nicholas Meyer, stuff like that. But, yeah, I think of Zemeckis, and I just think of comfort 80s films. You mentioned, and Back to the Future is such an important set of films for me growing up. It's one of the only things I've ever gone to the point of buying the 4K sets, because I just love those films so much. So yeah, I suppose I tend to think of family entertainment and sort of nostalgic fun.
I mean, I have to say, I think he must be one of the greatest directors of all time in terms of what films would you like to watch and throw on. Not films like what is technically a brilliant film that will last the length of time, perhaps. But certainly, I agree with you, Cam, that lately he's sort of drifted off to be just a workmanlike director, really. Like, I don't know why he's choosing projects like Witches and Pinocchio, because we don't really need them. He is a pioneer, so I think he should be doing more stuff like he was in the 80s and the 90s. But yeah, Back to the Future's for some of the greatest films ever made. Romancing the Stone is wonderful, a wonderful film.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite of his though is Castaway. I think it's probably could be in my like top 10 films of all time. I love it so much, and I think it's so well made that just that idea that if you're gone for 4 years, what could happen? I think it's a fascinating idea, and I think maybe tonally that is sometimes a bit similar to Allied. Maybe the one that's most like Allied in that it's quite not slow paced, but well paced. I'd say. There's not massive loads going on all at once.
Well, it's not reliant on action to propel the story. It's actually a drama.
Yes, drama.
And that's what I was just going to add to what you were saying, that Zemeckis shows he has range to do silly wackiness of Polar Express or Back to the Future all the way through to something like Allied and Castaway. It just shows the guy can do a lot.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like Robert Zemeckis, he almost has that like the James Cameron kind of element to him, where it's like he'll come up with like hugely technical, ambitious concepts, but can tie them to things that are incredibly mainstream. And you watch like a Castaway, or I think of Contact as well.
Great film.
Naming some of his movies that aren't necessarily on that Back to the Future level of all-time classics, but like he takes these things that are just a complete challenge, but he puts them in packages that are incredibly rewarding for everyone.
Yeah.
And they're incredibly absorbing, and they're so well told. He's just an incredible storyteller. And as Tom was saying, like nowadays I don't really know what he's doing. Like I remember he was even like circling The Flash, and you're like, why? Like, why are you doing this? You're like the seventh person attached to this movie for directing, and it's like he should be, carving out new territory, not doing that sort of stuff.
Which is why it baffles me seeing the response online today and hearing that this one wasn't like not maybe instantly ran to, I should say, but like Castaway was lauded and it was praised. He could do a drama that was well liked. So I'm curious to see what happened on the marketing side for this. Where did it start to fall down?
I'll have a bit of a note on that, actually. So just one note before we get to that, just about the production. Marion Cotillard was actually responsible for coaching Brad Pitt through his French dialogue quite a bit.
He did well.
So he did well. So you can credit her for that. But she struggled hugely with the firearms work. And they had actually a lot of issues. Like she said, she just had an absolute meltdown dealing with the guns. She went to gun safety and everything. But that was her biggest challenge getting through this movie. Except for something that was happening outside of the realm of the production, which was the Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie divorce that made the news.
Oh.
And a lot of the whirlwind of blogger and, TMZ kind of gossip around it was that Marion Cotillard was involved.
Wow.
And that led to a lot of questionable publicity around Allied during the production and the promotion. If you go and Google Allied from that time period, it's like so many stories about, is Marion Cotillard the third party breaking up this marriage? And she was complete in denial, like, I had nothing to do with this. But it was a very kind of like ugly story, and the film opened in the wake of all that.
Yeah. The films like that, where there's like that, the public have heard about a romance on set, like an affair, it sort of affects the film. I think there was one. What was the one with Meg Ryan? When she was meant to be having an affair.
Proof of Life.
Proof of Life. Yeah, the film sort of never took off because of that. And then Mr. and Mrs. Smith did okay at the box office, but people were like, "Oh, they don't really have much chemistry here, do they, in real life?" And even I think recently, well, there was Geely was the most famous one, isn't it, with Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez. And yeah, the list goes on. There's loads of these type of films.
Even for a contemporary reference, Don't Worry Darling, I think last year they had all that stuff about, someone, was it Harry Styles spitting at Chris Pine allegedly at the premiere and all this sort of nonsense?
Yeah.
And I just think like, what?
Right.
Just watch the film, enjoy it or dislike it, but go and see it and then make up your own minds.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so like Allied may have always been a tough sell to just general audiences, who knows? But like that kind of dark cloud hanging over it made it even tougher to sell because people were like, I don't want to go and watch a romantic story with Brad Pitt and Marion Cotillard, given all the publicity I've been hearing, or not publicity, but all the bad press I've been hearing surrounding it.
And not that we know the dirty laundry since, nor do I really want to wash it out here, but has there been any clarity since?
Marion Cotillard has always said no. There was nothing going on.
Okay.
Yeah. So, basically, this movie had a budget of $85 million, although there's rumors it was a little larger than that, but that's the acknowledged number. Domestically, did 40.1.
Oof.
Yeah. International 79.4 for a worldwide total of 119.5.
I mean, if it didn't spend much on marketing, maybe it sort of broke even, but that's not what you want from a Zemeckis film.
It is not, with like two huge stars.
Yeah, Brad Pitt
Yeah.
film. Yeah,
And also the fact that the budget is rumored to be bigger than 85 million.
sure. Okay. Yeah, so not had the best reception, not had the best time at the box office. The online response is starting to make a bit more sense to me now, unfortunately.
Yeah, it landed at number 68 for the year at the worldwide box office between Deepwater Horizon, the Mark Wahlberg film, which is actually really good.
Yeah.
And a Chinese romance film called I Belong to You.
Okay. Deepwater Horizon, I remember being quite good. So
It was, yeah.
Yeah, it was.
good bedfellows, I guess, at least around that point. Yeah. Anything else for us, Cam?
The top three for the year. Number 1 was Captain America Civil War. Number 2 was Rogue One, a Star Wars story. And number 3 was Finding Dory.
Oh, you had 2 out of 3 spy films there as well. I was almost like, could you do 3 in a row? That would have been great. A 3 spy movie top 3. That might be the first time ever, but alas, it was not to be.
It was not to be, and it was also not to be to win an Oscar for Allied because it was nominated for 1 Oscar for achievement in costume design. I'm going to name the nominees, and I want to see if you guys can think of who the winner is or guess the winner.
Okay.
So here are the nominees. So Allied, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, Florence Foster Jenkins, Jackie, and La La Land.
I know who I want it to be, but I think I know who it ended up with.
Yeah, I think it could be Jackie, which wasn't that good, I didn't think.
I wanted it to be La La Land, but I think it ends up with Fantastic Beasts because people are fickle.
Okay. Is that the guess?
Yeah.
Okay. Scott, you are right. Fantastic Beasts
Really?
won it. But with the BAFTAs, they had the exact same nominees, but Jackie won.
Okay, right. That might be what I was thinking of. But
We're splitting the difference there, Tom.
yeah, that'll do.
Yeah, I'll take it.
So yeah, that wraps up the behind the scenes on Allied.
Okay. Well, let's not burn the stroganoff. Let's get to it. Let's get it out of the oven. Let's talk about Allied. Tom, you spoke about sort of your day out seeing it at the theatres. You've revisited it for the show. You said you've watched it a few times since as well. We're going to throw to you first, as you're the guest. What do you think about Allied?
Yeah, so I did see it then. So that's back in 2016. I think I saw it again maybe when it came out on, well, Sky or something like that, maybe 2017. And then I don't think I've seen it and since then. So even though I've got this idea in my head of how it made me feel, like you, Cam, I'd sort of forgotten quite a lot about it. I remembered obviously the main twist, but the sort of I was when I was revisiting it this time for this review, I was thinking I'm really looking forward to seeing the bits in between and what happened. And there were a lot of bits I've forgotten about. There were quite a few action scenes that I've forgotten about. Mainly the one at the end where they sort of stormed that base to try and find out more information about her, basically. But yeah, I love drama films. I like romance. I like doomed romance, that kind of thing. And if you add in the spy element, it's probably the most me type of genre, which I accept is not really one that's going to light at the box office for modern audiences. I think if this came out in I don't know, any time up to the 70s, I think it would have done very well, particularly if you sort of have the equivalent movie stars of the day. And amazingly, I hadn't seen Casablanca until after I'd seen this.
Oh, wow.
So having seen it again now, it's like, oh, right, yeah. It's not the most original thing in the sort of feel of it and the location and everything. But yeah, I think technically it came across even better than I remembered. There's a lot of one-shots that I'd forgotten about, where there's a tense scene at the part, like a house party, where it's going round and round, and he can't quite get to her, and if he does, it's all on that. It all rides on that. Do you believe her? Do you believe she's a spy or not? in the second half of the film, and the audience are wanting her not to be, because they've got this idea in the heads that this is a really nice setup. They've amazingly got away from the war, very dangerous situations. They've started a family in England. Their jobs appear to be fairly tame, lovely family life, and of course they've had a baby. So that the audience in their minds, it's a good thing to think of them as like this could get threatened, unless otherwise there's no jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Zemeckis does a good job of creating characters you care for, and I think Brad Pitt's very, some people might say he doesn't show an awful lot of emotion in this and other films, like Troy, for instance. He's very stilted the whole way through, but I think that's good acting. I think that's the character he's playing. Marion Cotillard's character is much more visibly, she does all the talking. She's more personality and more life in her, and he's much more subdued. And I think that works well in all romantic dramas. So to sort of see him as the one who is quite hard to judge. She, at the end, of course, is trying to work out whether he has guessed anything or why he's acting a bit funny. And of course, when you've got two spies that we all know they're both spies, they can detect these behaviours.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another interesting aspect to it. But yeah, I thought it was excellent when I saw it again. I can probably understand why some people wouldn't take to it. For like 85 million, 100 million, you'd be expecting some massive action epic. And really, it feels like a sort of mid-budget film made very well on a mid-budget, if you know what I mean. It doesn't look cheap, but it doesn't look like there's been 100 million spent on it back. That's 8 years ago as well. So I can understand why people don't like it. If you don't buy into the premise, if you don't buy into the romance and the double crossing, then yeah, you're kind of stuck, aren't you, I guess?
It's a very I never considered that, but it's a very astute point about the budget, because I didn't know the budget watching it, but
No, I didn't know.
I wouldn't have thought this is an 80 million
No.
film. I wonder where 30 million of that went to.
I don't know. This looks pretty glossy to me. This looks expensive. I'd say Robert Zemeckis' ability to get production value out of his movie is pretty phenomenal.
I don't mean that as like a slight to him. I just mean like it doesn't seem like a big blockbuster epic.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't look like Oppenheimer looks better than this.
But 85 million is not that much money for a movie at this point in time.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm sure the Captain America movie that year cost $250 million.
Yeah. But, I mean, the stars would have cost a lot of money
True.
as well, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
So that's probably what some of the budget went to.
And you mentioned like the sort of stoicism of Brad Pitt there. I think that's an important thing of the film. I think it adds a layer of your believability, because he is a military man. He is and it's 1940s. It's not now. The people are more reserved and more contained at that point in time.
Absolutely.
And if people had an issue with that, I think I'd find it interesting that they did.
Uh-oh.
Because
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
What?
People.
What?
I do not appreciate Brad Pitt's performance in this movie at all.
Wow. Cam is coming in hot on this one. This is going to be interesting. Well, I mean, I will just finish my point.
Yeah.
Is I liken this to Connery in You Only Live Twice.
So phoned in. Good.
Oh. Oh. I think Connery knows exactly what he's doing in that film, and he is a well-trained agent that is on a mission. He doesn't have to show emotion all the time. He's doing the job.
Right.
Blunt instrument.
Yes.
But that's a You Only Live Twice discussion I'm bringing into this. Okay, well, then this is interesting. Tom, you like it, okay? You've gone back and you like it even more, you said. Good.
Yeah.
Counterpoint. Serve to Cam.
Not a huge counterpoint, really, because to me, what I appreciate and enjoy about this movie is Zemeckis' filmmaking.
Sure.
I think he is incredibly good at creating moments of suspense throughout this movie.
Yes.
And there is the action moments. I think, when he stages that shootout early in the movie at the German ambassador sequence, like that sequence is incredible. And you're like, oh my God. Like, imagine if Zemeckis did a whole movie like this. It would be unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And he makes it look easy. It's like effortless filmmaking that I'm sure required a lot of time and thought. But to me, like, honestly, where the suspense comes from in this movie is sequences like the rat catcher scene, where, you have this character who's basically telling Brad Pitt in no uncertain terms that, look, we think your wife is a spy and we are going to try to snuff her out.
Yeah.
And that is such a cold, methodical, espionage scene that I'm like leaning forward in my chair. And the whole blue dye concept, will she, take that information off the note and transmit it? To me, that's what kind of brings the movie to life. I'm not as big on where we go later in the film when we start having Brad Pitt go behind enemy lines with photos and try to find people to identify it. I think it kind of feels a little like pumped up, almost artificial melodrama. But in terms of like the central conflict and the suspense around it, I think Zemeckis is just a pro. And, we can talk about production design and all that later on. But to me, like, yeah, it's what will I think always stop me from connecting to this movie in any sort of emotional way is actually Brad Pitt's performance.
Wow.
Which to me, Brad Pitt is generally better when he's given something a little quirkier to play, where there's like a little bit of a glint of madness. And I don't think he's very good when he plays, button down. I think of another actor, say like Matt Damon, who I think can convey that much better. You watch him go through like the Bourne films, very buttoned down, and I think it just works. Whereas like Brad Pitt, it's like you don't see like the intelligence behind his eyes when he plays that, whereas you do with some other actors. I feel
what
like
a dummy, that Brad Pitt.
Not saying that. I'm just saying like you see like the way his eyes come to life when he's in like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or 12 Monkeys or something along those lines, when there's like
Sure.
something for him to chew on, something like Tyler Durden in Fight Club. When he plays straight, I think of movies like Meet Joe Black, 7 Years in Tibet, and this. And I go like, oh man, like the guy is a movie star. He looks like one on screen, but the charisma just feels like it has like cold water dumped on it.
Well, Meet Joe Black. I'm sorry, that's another one of my favourite films of all time.
Oh wow, have you seen the original?
No, I haven't. No, I would like to see that. Yeah.
Very different, wildly different movie.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
I think the whole point for me in that I do agree with you in that he's very, very stilted. But that I do generally think in Meet Joe Black, that's the character he's playing, because obviously he's death and he's inhabiting someone who he doesn't really know, and death has no personality like that. But that again, you can tell I like these slow paced films of drama and romance. This isn't that slow, but no, I think this is a very valid point. You could easily say I don't really buy him. Do you buy him as a spy though, Cam, or or the romance? Do you buy the romance?
I buy him as when they have him like choke that guy in the phone booth. I'm like, I buy him as an assassin.
Yeah.
Like the sequence at the end when they're cleaning up loose ends. That I buy. But I don't know that I buy him as someone who would be put into like social situations as a spy. Like Marion Cotillard has that like almost like extrovert like personality that you can totally buy her navigating all these various social scenes behind enemy lines. But like, I don't know that I buy it from him.
Okay. Well, this is interesting. I think I'll jump in on this one. I wrote down the following. People are sleeping on this film. Honestly, I think it's one of the better films I've seen so far this year in terms of spy movies. I don't know where the Zemeckis fans have been, because this is a film to watch if you like Zemeckis. I think this is a film to watch if you like the classic 1940s, 50s war type romantic dramas that we've covered on the show. We've watched films that have come out around the time that this war was happening, telling the same sort of story. This is just done on a much larger and grander scale with a lot more money. And I could get into the minutiae of maybe moments of Brad Pitt's performance. Yes, there's bits I don't like. I don't like when he breaks rank, personally. I'm a guy who likes that sort of stuff. When he goes off one at the end and tries to run away, I don't get that personally. I don't get why you wouldn't help your colleagues to... I know it is your wife, but it should have been a simple test that would have turned her out to be innocent if you believed her to be so. If you didn't believe her to be so, then obviously that would mean you're panicking. But that's because you are married to a traitor and you know it, which is actually worse. And that's choices that the film makes that maybe I rub up against. But that's minutia. Broad strokes, I really enjoyed this film, and I watched it twice for this because I enjoyed it so much. I watch it twice every time anyway, but the second time is usually quite painful because I've watched it and I'm just like taking notes. This was like watching a broad... I mean, it references Casablanca. I'm not saying this is Casablanca, but it's got a lot of it. It's got a lot of what I liked of Casablanca. It's got a lot of that romance. It's got a lot of that personal feelings. And I'm going to call back to Mark Kermode, British film reviewer, critic. He always says, if a film makes you feel something, it's doing something right.
Mm.
I cared. I cared at every twist, and the twists made my heart jump. I didn't like. I mean, I knew what was coming, but like by the time the final twist of the film, where she takes the gun, I'll leave it there. I'm like that. That hurt me. Like that got a reaction, a physical, emotional reaction out of me. And so that's credit to Zemeckis. That's credit to Matt Pitt, to Brad Pitt, to Marion Cotillard.
Yeah.
The whole cast of crew did a wonderful job. And you mentioned it was nominated for its costuming.
Yeah.
Spectacular. The costume was great. The set design was amazing. It brought you right back. There are some odd choices with green screen that maybe I'll get into there that I would have liked maybe some money spent on location shooting, because it feels very old school in the sense where it feels like a lot of this is done in the studio.
Yeah.
Like a Hitchcock style way of just filming stuff in the studio to control everything. But that might have been a choice that he was doing to sort of emulate films of that time. So to bring it together, I really enjoyed this film, and I think people should be checking it out. Let's get into the beat by beat likes, because it seems like we've all got some. Tom, I'm going to throw it to you first. Something you want to highlight that you really liked about the film.
You did mention green screen then. There is one bit of very Zemeckis visual effects, but it's done so well. And it's when there's that house party, and they're all outside, and they suddenly see the fact there's a raid going on.
Yeah.
And I like, first of all, the fact that it's obviously happened before. If that happened now, we'd all be absolutely terrified, wouldn't they? But they're all sort of like, well, this happens all the time, which, when you speak to your grandparents and stuff, it kind of did. But then when you see one of the planes gets hit and he's coming straight to their housing area, their housing estate, their streets, that's done so well because the camera is sort of not focused on it. You don't need to see the pilot or anything. It's always in the background, and it's genuine tension as they're running up to the room. But that again, that's a good moment in terms of the story. What do they both think of? And this is when you're thinking, is she evil? Is she just doing a job?
Mm-hmm.
Is she not a spy at all? But her instinct is to protect a child, which is obviously a great thing to be doing. If you should be protecting your child first and foremost, and the fact that they both do that shows that I think that's a key moment for him in the film, where he thinks like, I don't know, even if she is a spy, my love for her is more important, and my child with her is more important than that. And even though it misses and it goes behind, that's why I think that bit's really important.
But like, you're exactly right. It may be that she is a spy working for the enemy, but morally, they're the same.
Yes,
they have the same ethics.
Mm-hmm.
They want the same thing, and that probably leads more towards his choices that maybe I rubbed up against. But at the end of the film, by sort of betraying, in a sense, his country and his code, he's doing it for love, and clearly she loves him in that moment and their family.
Yeah, maybe a better ending in terms of that might have been really awful, that he had to be the one to shoot her.
Yeah,
or so that, and then you could have seen him sort of emotionally break down, because we don't quite get that at the end. You can see the desperation of him, and he does get that sort of nice ending. It's Jared Harris who sort of says, "No, he apprehended her and all this," and it's done very quickly that we know he's not going to be hung or whatever for treason.
Yeah, and I think like Stephen Knight said that there was like an execution in the quote unquote true story. So I think in that moment they actually decided to give the Marion Cotillard character the power to decide her own fate, which I mean, that moment where she's in the car and she just turns and looks at the baby and then gets out and executes herself. I mean, that moment is just played perfectly. Like, I think Marion Cotillard is just I mean, she's fantastic in like pretty much everything, but just holy smokes, that's like an acting showcase moment. And Zemeckis has the confidence in her to just hold the camera on her and let that tell the story.
I'm going to build on Tom's point with one of my likes, which is the use of building rising tension within the film. There are so many set pieces that Zemeckis puts in. Can mention sort of the interrogation interview sequence where he finds out about his wife. I wrote down, 5 I had, which is the ball.
Yeah.
As it builds up to the shootout, there's a lot of tense going on there. It all builds up to, is it going to turn up on time? Is the explosion going to happen on time? Very well done. We mentioned the interview. The party is great. It feels very claustrophobic in that little, 2 up, 2 down in North London. I've been in many houses just like it. I know exactly what that building feels like. the bomber coming at the building, and then of course the final plane sequence as he's trying to get his family out and fly away. He just is very good at building the tension in this film, which probably helps me connect to the characters because I feel that sense of rising tension throughout. But they establish it very early on with the ball. I think that's just a really good way of starting it off. And you don't know what the mission is necessarily. You know there's shooting involved, but you don't know what they necessarily need to do to escape. It doesn't spell it all out for you. It explains it as it needs to go, as it needs to as it goes along. But it's just wonderfully executed, all of those sequences, and I just love the tension in this film.
Well, I'll give you even a fun little moment of tension, which is when August Deal, who plays like a Nazi, drawing a high card for whether Brad Pitt will go to the party or not. And again, like the stakes of it are not huge, but suddenly you're like on the edge of your seat, like, wow, what's going to happen as you're watching, Brad Pitt's character shuffle cards, looking like a complete pro. And they actually asked Zemeckis about that, and he just said, digital trickery. He would not give Brad Pitt any credit, although they're clearly not showing Brad Pitt because they're cutting his head off in all those shots. But like a moment like that is small, but it really works. It kind of signals where you're going to go with the rest of the movie, because we were talking about that scene where the plane is going to crash into the house, and it's far off in the background, and it feels almost like North by Northwest, where you're seeing the plane in the distance get closer and closer, and they're kind of unsure, is this a danger, is this not? And Zemeckis talked a lot about Hitchcock while he was promoting this movie. I didn't think as much about North by Northwest over the course of the movie. I kept thinking about Suspicion, which is a movie where, a young woman marries Cary Grant and is unsure whether he is a murderer or not. And that is kind of the entire story of that movie. It's her trying to figure out what is going on with Cary Grant. And to me, like, that's when this movie is at its very best, which is like Brad Pitt trying to figure it out and look for signs within Marion Cotillard. I'm less drawn to when he kind of removes her from the equation and starts to investigate outside factors.
Well, there's something I want to come back to that in the dislike section, because it's something I think we could have improved this film on when it comes to the will they, won't they, is she, isn't she a spy story, which I'll come back to. But Cam, I do want to throw it to you for a like.
Well, I mean, just the entire visual design of this movie is fantastic. And,
Yeah.
the costume design is next level. Like, this is how you dress movie stars. And Joanna Johnston was the costume designer on the movie. The only Oscar nom, the only BAFTA nom this movie got, and deservedly so, because it's tough to do movie star glamour. And it's something that is very often like, oh, we've got big movie stars, we've dressed them nicely, there they are. And there's a big difference between just doing that and doing something like this, where every time they walk on screen, you're just like almost have your breath taken away at how incredible everyone looks. It has that perfect kind of nod to something like Casablanca, where every scene you remember what Ingrid Bergman is wearing in each of those moments. And that's going on here too, but also just like the production design and creating this, Berlin, London, all these various places that they occupy through the movie have that old-fashioned kind of romantic sweep to them. And that's a lot of work. That is not the sort of thing where you just kind of show up on the day and figure out your locations. This movie just looks beautiful in that regard. And that's why, like, going back to the green screen thing, like, that's why that's maybe a little extra jarring, is because the rest of the movie looks so fantastic.
Well, it has a sense of authenticity to it. Like, I know this is obviously filmed a lot of it on soundstage, green screens and whatnot, and I have some issues there. But costuming is fantastic. A lot of the sets are brilliant. They use some real locations where they can, and it feels like you're actually watching a film made around this time. And that might be a little bit to do with camera trickery and lenses and things like that too. Maybe how the film, or if it's digitally, it's like processed to look a little bit like film from that time. But it just looks the part. And that's a lot of that, bringing that audience in and bringing you in as a viewer to this world of 1942. You have to make it look and feel like that, because you can push people away if you do make a wrong choice. And there is an interesting choice that pushed me away, which I might talk about later. I'm not sure. But yeah, I agree with you, Cam. I think it is very good at bringing people in. And I think credit to the production team, set design, costuming, great across the board.
And it's interesting, total coincidence, but like the night before I watched this, I watched The Good German, the Steven Soderbergh film that I hadn't seen before. And it was interesting to see two top-notch directors, do these kind of throwbacks to Casablanca. And I feel like the Soderbergh one feels a little more like actors in cosplay and he shoots it black and white, 4:3 frame, all that sort of thing to make it look like an old movie. But I often felt like I was watching, 2008 George Clooney just kind of dressed up to look like he was in the 1940s, whereas the characters in Allied feel like they actually inhabit that time period.
There's one scene I wanted to mention. I hope it's not the one, Scott, that you had an issue with. But
Go
if this film did as well as it, I would have liked it to,
on.
Brad Pitt, massive thing. I think the scene would have been remembered as much as like the one in Ghost on the Potter's Wheel. I'm not. You'll think of know what I'm thinking of. In the sand, in the sandstorm, the
Yeah.
sort of moment they sort of get it on, and it's the camera again is circling around them as it's happening. There's no score, and it's one of those like very iconic imagery. Like this is film. This is not a play. This is not televisual. This is proper cinema. Yes, you could say it's a bit cheesy, but this is something that obviously Zemeckis has brought to the piece. And I think, yeah, I'm a sucker for this kind of thing. It's very like you would talk about that. I'd talk about that with my wife. She'd probably remember that scene, that particular moment. And I do think it solidifies their romance as well, because he's sort of very serious most of the time, and she's very seductive. And we all know that, of course, they're two beautiful people, but they're also doing a job. And there's a line, isn't there, before that? I think that it's very easy to basically have a relationship with someone while you're a spy, but it's very difficult if you actually have feelings, and that's something that is a central theme of the film. But I hope that's not the one, Scott, you were going to say was a dislike.
No, that's not at all. I mean, it's interesting. I now can't get the idea of having Unchained Melody playing in that scene
Yeah,
out of my
yeah,
head. That
yeah.
would have bumped it up. I think
It
people would have
wouldn't it?
flocked if you'd had that playing. No, it's maybe I'm reading too much into that, but that scene to me always sort of felt like it's two spies who could die tomorrow,
Yeah,
and they're like, well, let's have a moment of joy in this life of sadness.
And we are beautiful people.
yeah,
It doesn't hurt to be them either.
no,
For my little dislike, we have sort of brushed past it. I'll just add a little bit of sauce to it. I just think, I disagree with Cam's assessment of Brad. I think he does well in this role, and I think Marion is my MVP though. She is the heart of the film, if it has one. And I do note that it's interesting that in two of the films I've seen her in, she gets revenge against the enemy by having sex with them, which is interesting. This and Dark Knight Rises. A theme here, I don't know. People can do the research. But I think she is fantastic. She grabs your attention from the second you see her across the ballroom. When Brad Pitt catches her eye, you are locked in. She has a great ability to just feel very warm and approachable from day zero. Like she's giving Brad Pitt's character this world to inhabit. She's teaching him French. She's lining up his wardrobe for him, picking outfits, and there's something very like homely and warm about it that you kind of want to protect her from very early on, which I think is a choice from screenwriter and director here, for you to want to be on her side so they can pull the rug out from you later on. But it's something about her performance, and there's a sort of wounded bird thing she's got going on, like especially when they're talking up on the rooftop, and you can tell that a part of her is damaged and she needs to be protected, but at the same time she's pulling out a Sten and shooting people across the room and looking like a badass. And I just think it's like a total package performance.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think you mentioned, Cam, before that the scene at the sort of casino with the cards and all that. That's the juxtaposition of that is, of course, at the end. It sounds pretty basic on paper, but can she play the piano? It comes down to that, doesn't it? It's a very horribly awkward, tense scene. And I go into this film. Honestly, I didn't know any of the background. I didn't know that this was going to be I just thought it was about spies in the World War. That's all I knew.
Sure.
So that was enough for me, of course. But that sort of moment where you think, go on, Marion, play some amazing. Was it the Marseillaise? Absolutely, that would have been so good. And then when she just doesn't even attempt it, shuts the lid, and you're like, oh, great. What do we do now?
that's where you really see the confidence of Zemeckis to just
Yeah.
let that moment play. And I think like that's where this movie speaks to his best instincts are those moments where it's just hold back and let the audience kind of lean in forward.
I suppose I have one tiny little like to drop in, and that is the sound design of the film, which is not something I often pick up on. I'm not such a fan of the Newman score; doesn't really do much for me personally. But there's a couple of nice little touches throughout, and the one bit I'll point to is the party, which we mentioned before. If you pay attention, the music gets louder as the party goes on, which is a subtle way of building tension, which we mentioned earlier. But it's just a nice little touch that I'm guessing Zemeckis and whoever did the sound design for this film added in. That it's the sort of thing like it's the next level filmmakers thing you'd add in. Like you wouldn't get this at entry level filmmaking. This is someone who's been around and done a lot of big films and knows how to ratchet it up, and it's a great little touch.
Yeah, I will just slight corrective. It was Alan Silvestri who did the score for this, not
I'm sorry.
Newman.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it's funny because you say Newman, and Newman, I find his score is often quite forgettable. So I was like, no, that makes sense. But Silvestri, yeah, who he collaborated with on Back to the Future, I kind of agree. It's functional, but it doesn't stand out to me.
It's quite similar to the score from Castaway, actually. What I like about that score is there's no music whatsoever while he's on the island. The only music is before and after, and that sort of bridges the whole film together. And it's more like the plaintive love theme in this is really lovely. And yeah, there's not much sort of action music or anything like that. I think it's perfectly well. It's not serviceable. I think it's a decent score, and I think critically that was one of the things people did seem to take to. But yeah, I don't know. I just think those production values, like you keep saying, you can't really argue with them. I think this is such a well-made film. Whether or not you buy the story and the performances is another matter. But directorial, the costumes, the sound, the settings, the visual effects, everything is done so well, I think.
And I think before we head on over to dislikes, I have one little thing to chime in with, and that is and it's nice to see that even in the 1940s, people were still shagging on hamster teeth.
Yeah.
That's a reference only the Brits will get.
Yeah. Usually politicians as well.
No comment.
Okay, and now we'll cut to some Jasper Carrot comedy.
Yeah.
PG. Yeah.
I could say shagging. That's not a swear word. The spy who shagged me, that's fine. It's out there.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Red alert, spy hards. We are shaking things up over on the Patreon page.
That's right, we are launching an exclusive new show where we tackle the exploits of the small screen's greatest secret agents, like Jack Bauer, George Smiley, and beyond.
And don't forget, every month you also get 2 Agents in the Field episodes where we decode the adventures of your favorite spy actors in their biggest non-spy movies. But Cam, tell the people what we have coming up next.
May was one hell of a month over on the Patreon. We reviewed Pulp Fiction and The Return of the Pink Panther, and also the 2008 TV movie 24 Redemption. The hits, they just keep on rolling, Scott.
So don't get left out in the cold. Help support your favorite spy movie podcast and join the circus at patreon.com/spyhards. But before this message self-destructs, let's get back to the Spy Jinx. All right, dislike times. Let's talk about the stuff we didn't quite like. Tom, guests always go first. Give us a dislike.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it before. I think it's whether or not I would have ended it like that. I do love the sort of coda with that back view of him with his daughter grown up. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
But I think I would have preferred it if he did actually kill her. I think that would have been a more effective ending. So even though I think it's a great tense scene because it's unlucky in a way, it's only down to fate that the propellers don't work. If they worked, they would have got away. And then it's one of those fateful endings where whatever happens, they've had it, haven't they? Even if they'd have gotten away, what sort of life could they have realistically had? They would have stolen, an RAF plane. I'm sure they would have been hunted down and they could not live in peace. So it comes to, I do like it in a sense that she is the one who thinks, I'm going to have to end this. I trust my husband enough to raise the girl on his own. But yeah, I think I would have probably just changed that to he is the one who actually had to kill her. That's what I would have done differently, I think.
I think it lacks sort of the sweeping romance if you do it that way, but I agree with you. I think
Yeah,
that would have added a little bit of emotional punch if it'd been like, no, this is your job. It's what you have to do.
Yeah, because that's what the choice is, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
country or romance. That's it.
And I will add, you mentioned sort of seeing them off at the farm. I like reading the tidbits on IMDb, and someone was nerdy enough to point out that at that time, if you wanted to live in Medicine Hat, which is in Canada, you would have been at least 6 hours drive from any civilization, so it would have been a miserable existence.
Cool.
Yeah. When they were like waxing poetic about Medicine Hat, I was like, okay, sure.
I'm trying to think of like the British equivalent. I suppose it's like living in the Highlands or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cold.
Yeah, it's like in the Canadian prairies where, yeah, it's going to be really cold, desolate. Okay, fair enough.
What a dream.
Yeah, it wouldn't be my dream. No.
Cam, what about what is your dream? Can you give us a dislike?
Well, I'm not going to keep hammering on Brad Pitt because I think I kind of made my point there as to why it didn't work for me. But I will say, like, there is an element of the back half of this movie that doesn't work for me, and I kind of acknowledged it up front. But like, I like when he goes to like Matthew Goode, for example, as the injured man who can't identify a photo because can no longer see. Moments like that really work for me. What doesn't work for me is more of that side mission where it's Brad Pitt and his team going behind enemy lines to break into a prison to see this drunk vomiting man to show him a photo. It feels really pumped up and just it kind of lacks the intimacy of the rest of the movie, and I don't get any sort of suspense out of it, which I would be less likely to poke holes in it or be annoyed by it if I was getting something, whether it was exhilaration, whether it was suspense, whether it was something. But it just feels like, to me, almost like a concession for the audience of like, look, we know there's not a lot of action here, so we're going to create an action sequence. And is it technically well done? 100%. Zemeckis can't phone this stuff in. But like, there's something about it that to me just kind of kills the sweep of the movie and the dramatic momentum. And it also keeps Marion Cotillard off screen, which to me is not that effective.
For me, that moment felt like a reshoot.
I could see that.
Like they got notes like this last act is a bit slow. We need something, and then you go and do that.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly possible. Like they showed it to a test audience, and the test audience was like, I mean, famously, test audiences are always just the worst, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, too boring, too slow, and that was that.
I will add to interesting choices in the back half of this film, and I said one of the things I didn't like about it, and I'll sort of throw it all in together. There is a line in here, I think from Jared Harris's character, or maybe one of his other colleagues where he's working at the military, where they say it's a test. They're just testing you to go and work for, I think they write it down as V section, and that's a good concept. A twist within a twist. And is she not actually a spy? And this is all a test. And they never really give that any credence. And there's no like maybe he goes to her and asks, or he starts to believe that she isn't a spy and lives his life normally and challenges come up. It's more just a case of he spends the entire film just running straight at the problem, and including running to France to try and prove her innocence. Whereas I feel like if maybe you had moved the twist a bit earlier in the film, you could have spent more time dealing with the ramifications of her being a spy, or is she or isn't she? Whereas I think the film is pretty insistent that she is. There's a lot of evidence.
I think that's put in there because it's halfway through the film to have half of it left thinking, oh, she's a spy, right? That's it. There's no tension, is there? And you're thinking she probably is, but that line just gives it that maybe there's a chance here.
Edges it out. Yeah.
And it works to an extent, but of course the betrayal was always going to happen, and it was never going to end well. Because the other way it could have ended, of course, was that she wasn't a spy, but they still thought she was, and she still got executed. That was the other way they could have done it, I suppose.
Yeah, that's the dark ending.
Yeah, really awful.
Or there's a dramatic escape because they think she's a spy, she isn't, but they have to get out of there. Yeah, I could see that as well.
I've seen both versions of this story where like there's a twist within a twist and she isn't, and then that she isn't, they get away. I like where this lands. I just think there was a little bit of room to farm, or like there's a little bit of story to farm out about her maybe not being a spy and the ramifications of her being wrongfully accused.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? But maybe that's either another film or too long. Maybe that's a 2.5 hour film. This is a 2 hour film, and I'm belaboring the point. Now, I mentioned I did have one more thing to bring up earlier on. And, I've also sort of talked about how when it comes to having the military in films before, I really appreciate a sense of professionalism and duty. And also, I appreciate one thing this film does for the most part, which is really a sense of believability, of verisimilitude, of bringing the audience in and saying, this is where this film is set, and doing their best to make them feel like that is the case. But there's a moment in this film that I think really works against it in that sense, and that is the Lizzy Caplan character. Now, Lizzy Caplan plays Brad Pitt's sister, and it's portrayed that Lizzy Caplan is in the Air Force, the Canadian Air Force, working inside of Britain, and seems to be serving in a contemporaneous role to Brad Pitt, which is not something that women did at the time. To the best of my knowledge, which is a small hiccup that I would forgive. But it's also, added in with Lizzy Caplan's character is clearly gay, which again is not a problem. You all know me, that's not a problem. But you first find out this is the case when there is a big party scene at the pub where all of her colleagues, of Brad Pitt's colleagues, are there, superior officers as well. And she's saying how, like, whatever happens during the Blitz stays during the Blitz, wink, wink. And she's there, kissing her girlfriend in front of all of these people. Now, that's not something that happened at the time. And later in the film, Brad Pitt goes to Lizzy Caplan's house, and you see Lizzy with her girlfriend, and they're living together, and that's, that's not a problem, because a lot of the stuff was done, behind closed doors back in those days. And you could have had Brad Pitt just turn up and find out about that relationship, find out about Lizzy Caplan's sexuality, maybe had something to do with that, something to say with having this choice in the film. But, it just chooses to do this with her, but nothing else with it. There is no reason to have her as gay in the film. It doesn't lend anything to the story. And not only does it not do that, but also it's just completely fictional compared to a film that otherwise is trying its best to be quite grounded and gritty and dramatic. And it just bumped up against me. So I wanted to bring it up to hear what you all thought, because I'm curious to hear what you both think about that.
I think that might be, yes, just to sort of say England wasn't that bad at the time, but also these people are very liberal and very free. They're like, they were all, in cupboards, men and women together.
Yeah. Yep.
Which at the time would have been seen as very, this is a society where you couldn't even sleep together, of course, until you married. I mean, it was an absolute sacrilege. Divorce was, very, very frowned upon. So to have this going on in secret, albeit that, just showed that maybe these kind of people are more her kind of people, whereas he'd see them as hedonistic, perhaps, and too liberal. And these are kind of her society friends that she gets along with. But yeah, I don't know. I think it maybe have been a little unnecessary. I think I probably agree with you there, Scott.
I think my issue with it is it's so underwritten.
Sure.
And I don't know if it was like cut down, if there was deleted scenes with Lizzy Caplan that added up to more. But when you start to like cut down what that character even means within the story, you go like, well, why did they make this choice? And is it something to show that there's like a freedom she has in wartime because people are focused on other things? I don't know. This is me trying to extract meaning from the decision.
Yeah.
And I don't know because, Lizzy Caplan is a very strong actor. I'm more baffled when I watch the movie why she does so little.
Yeah.
Because it seems like the kind of thing that you wouldn't hire her for. But I have to imagine there's something that hit the cutting room floor. Because, it just seems like it's too important a choice for that character to not have some sort of reason for it within the story.
Like it's almost as if it's set in a parallel world where it is all happy and everyone just does this and open about it, closer to where we are now. But that isn't and wasn't the scenario. And I just think like having Brad Pitt turn up at the house is absolutely fine, and seeing them together is absolutely fine. But I don't know where that choice was, and I think you're probably right, Cam. There probably was a connecting scene between those two moments that just gave you a little bit more context as to people were just more open during the Blitz.
It's almost like because it's chaos around, that you can kind of live the life you'd like to lead because, you have Brad Pitt and Marion Cotillard, two spies who find love together and form a home. There's no real long-term stability to this, but they're able to because of the war. And if you had Lizzy Caplan acknowledge, I might not be able to live this life when things go back to normal, but right now I'm able to find my happiness. You'd have a parallel relationship going on there between the two of them that might speak to an overall thematic concern, but the way they chop it down, it's all gone for Lizzy Caplan.
Yeah, that's a shame. That is a real shame because she's a great actor.
Mm-hmm.
Before we go to the knock list, just final notes section. Anyone got anything worth mentioning or bringing up we haven't mentioned in your notes so far? Tom, I'll go to you first. Anything you haven't brought up about Allied?
The things we haven't really talked about are the sort of the first act, really, of building the relationships, the tension, and maybe that it feels so different, doesn't it? By the end of the film, you're not in you're in a sort of unglamorous, rainy English setting,
just like home.
And you think, and that's done deliberately, definitely. So I think at the beginning it is the glamorous side of the war, where we're not really seeing any fighting. We're seeing the spying and all that sort of activity. When we go, the further we go on, we see the grim realities. We see that the air raid. Then we see when he goes rogue, to try and find out more about her, and it ends, like I say, in the rain, in a little part, a little airport in England. So I think the first half is good for building that world, that spy world, and I just wanted to sort of give a bit more positivity to that part of the film that maybe is done deliberately to lull you into a false sense of security as to what kind of film this is going to be, I think.
Yeah, when you have the scenes of them just like at the cafe, for example,
Yes.
and there's like, oh, that officer over there interrogated me once. Like, there's that sense of not only is it beautiful looking, but it's dangerous.
Yeah.
And that kind of world of forbidden espionage is really effective stuff.
And with Brad Pitt being unable to speak proper French, like that's a great inclusion as well, because he could just mispronounce one word in French and everyone's like, hey, that's not right. No one would say it that way. It's like the three fingers from Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah.
Sure. Another one, actually, August Deal, also tied to that moment you're talking about, Scott.
Yeah.
What's the chemical code for phosphate?
Mm-hmm.
And you have Brad Pitt having to go over and write it down. That's another great little suspense moment that Zemeckis creates. And did you catch on August Deal's connection? We've seen him before.
Yes.
He's obviously in Inglourious Bastards with Brad Pitt, but we saw him previously playing Angelina Jolie's husband in Salt.
Ah.
Yes, we did. I did write that down in my notes. So it's a family affair here on Spy Hard.
Yeah, no kidding.
A broken family, unfortunately. So maybe less said about
that time. Yeah.
I will add in. Firstly, it was nice to see Brad Pitt reading a Graham Greene novel.
Mm-hmm.
Classic spy author, although he was not reading a spy story. It was Brighton Rock, which is a betrayal story, really more than anything else. But does thematically serve the purpose of the film, which is nice to see. I just wanted to tip my hat to the use of mirrors in the film. There's a few, I think 3 scenes where you see Brad Pitt or another character looking through a mirror, through another shot of a mirror to see someone else. I think he sees Marion undressing at one point through mirrors, and then sees her do the handoff with the paper through mirrors as well. I think there's one more I'm missing. But just a nice bit of film, a bit of film craft there, a bit of cinematography work that I just like seeing.
It's the little touches that make a movie like this kind of stand out, right? Like, you could hand this to a different filmmaker and they could create something totally adequate and enjoyable to sit through, but Zemeckis just has such a great eye that he works in little touches everywhere he can.
And the last thing I'll add in is it's crazy to see how easy it is to steal a plane. No wonder they shut down RAF Hendon, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Although you've tried many times and not had the same success rate.
No, they know my face now. They turn me away instantly.
Yeah. A couple of notes I had, just small little things. That moment where Marion Cotillard shoots her friend's husband in that sequence.
Great moment.
At the ambassador's place. Like, that is a fantastic character moment. And you also understand just how dangerous she is as a spy. It's probably the moment that underlines that the most. And then there's another one with a Spy Hard's connection.
Oh.
Brad Pitt kicks a chair against a wall. Wasn't it Brad Pitt that threw the chair in Spy Game?
It certainly was. One of the famous chair moments in spy films. We're cataloging chairs. We love chairs here.
Brad Pitt does not care for chairs the same amount as we do, Scott, but that evidence is very clear on screen.
We can add it to our list of chair usages in spy movies. A weird list, but hey, we're curating it. It's our list, folks. Well, let's get to it then. The final list, the knock list. Tom, this is your first time voting on it. Long time coming, I say. But before we get it, Cam, just explain for Tom and the listeners what the knock list is.
Yes, the knock list is our tortured acronym for Need to See Official Classics of the Spy Hards podcast, where every week after we talk about a movie, we decide whether it belongs on the all-timers list. And some movies that have made said list, a number of Bond films, Goldfinger, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice did make it on, despite my reservations. But also things like Bridge of Spies, North by Northwest, a lot of the Hitchcock stuff. So it's kind of an open field. Even something like Our Man Flint made it on. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the all-time towering classics. It's the movies that are important to the overall spy canon.
Exactly. So a diverse list, but not a particularly long one. We're quite discerning about films that go on the list. So it'll be a three-way vote. Tom, you get the first vote. Yes or no, is Allied going on the list of the best spy films of all time?
It is for me, yes. I know that might sound ridiculous to passing viewers. If you haven't seen it, or if you have seen it a long time ago, give it another look, because there's so much to enjoy here. There's really peak filmmaking, good performances, particularly Marion Cotillard is excellent, as we've discussed. And yeah, I think it's a very rewatchable film. I think there's lots of themes going on. And when you look back at it again, even just then, you mentioned when she kills the ambassador's wife, that is a thematic point about, can you actually do this? Can you betray at the very last moment? Because they will have to do that later. So yeah, I'm sure I'll get gunned down by lots of you listeners to say that it involves, it should go through to the very greatest spy films ever. But yeah, it's one that I would turn to more than some of the classics, just because of the watchability. I'm not saying it's as iconic or as fantastical and all that, but yeah, I'll pass it through just to give it more of a chance out of the three of it getting into the knock list.
Okay, well, that's one vote for yes. It's all still to play for. Cam, we'll go to you.
It's a no for me, but this is not like The Art of War or something where I'm like, this is a bad movie. I think Allied is a good movie.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of issues with it, but it is, as Tom said, it's very watchable. Zemeckis is just, unbelievable as a filmmaker. But I also have to ask myself, where would I rank this in my Robert Zemeckis rankings? And it would not be particularly high. I think it is a very, it's a sort of middle of the road work for him, but it's one I found quite entertaining to watch.
But that list of films above him, or above this film on his list, does it contain any other spy films?
No, it doesn't. But
so where is this ranking on your Zemeckis spy film list?
It's the only entry there is, unfortunately.
It's number one.
Yeah, to me, this is just not top tier Zemeckis. It's a totally entertaining, somewhat in my mind, forgettable movie.
Okay, it's one apiece. It's coming down to it's coming down to my vote, which is rare actually, because usually I'm outvoted by this point. It's either a yes or a no, and I'm just stuck with the answer. I wrote down my answer to this ahead of time, and I was going to drag this out for dramatic effect, and I'm not going to. I had a great time watching this. I would watch it again. I would recommend other people watch it, and if that's not the point of the knock list, I don't know what is. Yes, I'm putting it on the knock list.
Brilliant.
Boom.
So, Cam's been outvoted. Me and Tom are gliding effortlessly over the channel and onto the knock list. It's made a safe landing back in Blighty. Welcome aboard, Allied.
It's my newest You Only Live Twice.
It is your next You Only Live Twice. And speaking of James Bond, Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Long time coming. I'm glad we finally did it. We'll have to do it again. Before I let you go, though, we've mentioned Really 007. We've spoken about Really 007, but where can people find Really 007?
Well, the usual places. We do have quite a strong presence on social media. If you just look at Really 007 Pod, you should find us on Instagram, Twitter or X or whatever it's called today, and Facebook. And yeah, you'll get posts there. But to listen to the show, it's on everywhere. It's on iTunes and Spotify, the main ones, Apple Podcast. We do have a website at Pod Dojo. So if you Google Pod Dojo as well, poddojo.com, pod-dojo.com. You can find that and our sister podcast as well. But we've also got a YouTube channel. We're doing more stuff on video now. So that's, again, Really 007 Pod on YouTube. And you should find interviews, reviews, news, things like that.
And just to tease the listeners who want to head over and check you guys out, what have you got coming up this month?
Well, all being well, we will have the start of our celebrations. So we try and do every year to celebrate big Bond anniversaries. So this year, most people might know it's the Goldfinger's 60th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
There's also Man with the Golden Gun's 50th. And the one that people don't mention is it's The World Is Not Enough's 25th. So we'll be having a few tie-ins for that. But hopefully, by the time you're listening to this, we should have our Goldfinger 60th anniversary celebration episode out for you to listen to, which is just basically a love-in. It's not really a review. It's not sort of saying, this bit I didn't like, did you like that bit? It's, what do we love about this film? What can we celebrate it 60 years on?
And for a bit of connective tissue, Cam and I appeared in your 60th anniversary from Russia with Love last year. So
yes, you did, yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
You're welcome to contribute to this Goldfinger. Of course you are, guys.
Oh, now that's the real tease.
Oh,
You
wow.
might see us pop up, but like spies, you never know where we'll be. So, but Tom, thank you again. It's been a pleasure. Everyone, go check out Really 007. It's got our blessing. It's got our stamp of approval. Thank you, Tom.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me on, and yeah, I've loved it, and I'm so glad it's got through. I'm well chuffed.
Cam isn't so much. There you go, folks. That was our chat about Allied, a new film on the knock list. Light the fires and ring the bells. It's a joyous occasion.
It's like when the new pope is announced and the smoke comes up through the chimney and everyone celebrates in the streets. That's right.
Yeah, and Cam reckons that Tom and myself have been inhaling some of that smoke.
Well, let's just say this may get mentioned in the future.
That's fine. Hey, let us know, folks. Do you agree or disagree about the knock list choice on this one? It could be a hot take, who knows, but I had a good time with it nonetheless. But speaking of a good time, Cam, let's tell the people what we got coming up next week.
Yes. Well, actually, our guest Tom kind of queued it up earlier. He was talking about early on in his podcasting career doing an episode on Octopussy. Well, we're going to celebrate the anniversary of Octopussy. It's the 41st anniversary, the classic 41 anniversary, the one that we here at Spy Hards truly embrace. And we are going to bring on Vijay Amritaj to talk about his role as Vijay, Bond's man in India, from that 1983 classic.
And not to mention, you guys know we love a bit of Trek. He was Captain Randolph in Star Trek 4, one of the only people to be in both a Bond film and a Star Trek film. It's a great discussion. Vijay is very generous with his time. Lots of fun stories about Roger Moore. If you like a bit of Octopussy, Spy Hards is your destination for next week.
And some great tennis stories as well.
Yep, so I can't wait to serve it all up to you next week. Your mission, folks, should you choose to accept it, is to join us next week as we sit down with Mr. Vijay Amritaj and talk all things Octopussy. If you like what you heard on this episode, please consider joining us over on our Patreon at patreon.com/spyhards. Links in the show notes below. Almost 100 bonus episodes available now for your ears only, of course, and every little donation helps the Spy Hards cause, helps us keep the lights on here at Spy Hards HQ, and make sure you follow us discreetly as always on social media at Spy Hards, that's SPYHARDS, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, folks, look for the hummingbird.